I have the honor of introducing my colleague, Palencia Mobley. Palencia Mobley is the founder and CEO of Mode Collective, an authority on water infrastructure and environmental engineering. She has more than 20 years of experience in planning, design, construction, administration, and management services for water and wastewater utilities around the United States. Previously, she was the Deputy Director and Chief Engineer at Detroit Water and Sewerage Department. Under her leadership, DWSD increased investment in green stormwater infrastructure by $19 million in just 10 years. She also increased the renewal of water and sewer infrastructure from 10 to 50 plus miles per year. Also, during her tenure there, Detroit passed the first post-construction stormwater ordinance, and DWSD implemented a full lead service line replacement program in 2018. That same year, she was appointed to the Michigan Infrastructure Council, which she now chairs. A dedicated change agent, Mobley is committed to ensuring that infrastructure renewal creates economic opportunity in underserved communities. Thank you for being here today, Palencia.
So good afternoon, everyone. It's always funny for me to hear Dr. Miller call me her colleague because she was my professor about 20 years ago when I was completing my master's degree at Wayne State University. And so I did not get the instructions, so I'm thinking this is the clicker or not. Do I just use the mouse? This, and just hit green, the green button. Okay, perfect. Thank you. See, I'm a little technologically challenged, right? It wouldn't be a conference if we didn't have that scenario. So I'm no longer a public servant. So I have the opportunity to speak extremely freely. And this more. Okay. And in that vein, I may say some things that challenge how you think. I may say some things today that challenge how you feel about certain topics, but I will be unapologetic in how I choose to discuss these things. So when I stepped away from my work with the city of Detroit, and even while I was in that work, I had an opportunity to really understand what happens in Southeast Michigan, but what happens across the United States when it comes to how we ultimately treat people of color and where we choose to make investments in this country. And so I've titled this presentation, Black, Blue, and Green, the Color of Water. And you may ask where that came from. Black, because Detroit is a majority Black city, and the word Detroit is synonymous with Black. It is synonymous with what we have determined as race being Black, but we all know there's only one race, the human race. Blue, because water, of course, is blue. And green, because green is about money, and you don't make money without water. So just a slight overview of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk a little bit about the energy water nexus, why that's so important. Great Lakes cities and how we fare in the revolutionizing of electrification in America, and then how we leverage resources for sustainability. So as we all know, it takes energy to make water, and it takes water to make energy, and lots of it. And we don't often think about this, but you may think about it. Anybody in the room ever had a basement backup? Just raise your hand. Just, I had one 2 weeks ago. Raise your hand. That's okay. Sometimes those basement backups are caused by mechanical failures, like pumps that just can't cut on and can't get the water out fast enough, especially if you live in a combined sewer system like I do. And then other times it's just those systems are overwhelmed and there's not enough pumping in the world that will move the water away. But additionally, and this is from 2011, I really tried to find the most updated version of this and could not. But this is really just a diagram showing the various ways in which water and energy transfer and the different uses for it. And so the biggest thing to note, right? You know what takes up all our water? Growing food so we can eat. So everybody who's way smarter than me, who does all the research, maybe it's time to think about some decentralization and collection of water and runoff on farms and how to reuse it, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody that's way smarter than me, please go work on that. Additionally, power generation, as I've already mentioned, right, is one of the huge consumers of water. But the third thing is manufacturing. And we make a lot of things that make a lot of people money. So with results to manufacturing, the growth sector right now is what? Electric vehicles and charging stations and putting in electric infrastructure. But the thing that really showed us just how important technology is were semiconductors. So if you all remember during the pandemic, you couldn't get a car, you couldn't get electronics, you couldn't get a lot of different things because people could not make chips. And so during this particular process, we, had wait times of months to get these different goods. But one of the things about the semiconductor industry is that Intel projects the demand for semiconductors will make up 20% in 2030 just for vehicles. Semiconductors just for vehicles will be 20% of the demand for semiconductors by 2030. And that's not that long away. But what do semiconductors require to be manufactured? Lots of what? Water. And so we are in a state and we are in a place where we have what? Water and lots of it. Treated water, clean water. And so most of us probably never think about how many different semiconductors are in our vehicles. But I love the little feature. I used to say I was never going to use the backup reverse feature on my car and look at the little camera, but who looks at the little camera every single day when they, oh, yeah, right? So we use these little things, right? Some of them are much smaller than the tip of your finger, right? But we use these little things and they're everywhere. And it's hundreds slash almost 1,000 in most vehicles today. So we have all these Great Lakes cities, right? And you got Buffalo, Erie is tiny, Cleveland, Geary is not on this map, Toledo, Detroit, Bay City, Chicago, Milwaukee, Toronto, on and on and on and on. And the Great Lakes in the Midwest in particular were manufacturing hubs. So, Detroit is known for putting the world on wheels. Pittsburgh is known for its steel. Geary is known for producing tons of steel. And these are places that literally made most of the things that we used to drive back in the day, and we still kind of drive now. But where are the hubs for electric vehicle manufacturing? Detroit is new as a hub for EV manufacturing because some of you may remember when General Motors announced that they were going to close GM Hamtramck / Poletown / whatever you want to call it. And I was in government administration at that time. There was no call to the city of Detroit. That plant is located in the city of Detroit. I'd worked with General Motors for some time as they were looking to reduce their stormwater charge, what we call drainage. And they had made a significant investment of $3 million to basically collect all their stormwater runoff and ultimately reuse it in their cooling towers and other processes on site. Great, right? Win, win, win. So it was a shock to everyone, maybe a year and a half, 2 years after that had gone through, that they were thinking about closing GM Hamtramck. GM Hamtramck has now been retooled to be one of their electric vehicle manufacturing hubs. But that was not the case, but that's kind of why we're on the list right now. But you see Austin, Texas, Nashville, Detroit, Phoenix, and Reno. Okay, 3 of these look strange just because, like, you don't even have a lot of water, right? Arizona, Phoenix has locked up their water supply, right? They can get water, but there are going to be so many other challenges in Phoenix post as we continue to have climate change. Phoenix is going to be on fire, and most of us probably don't realize how much of our food actually is grown in Arizona. That's a conversation for another day. But where are the places that have excess water treatment capacity? Definitely not Phoenix. Definitely not Reno. Sure isn't Austin. The places that have excess water and, treated water capacity: Detroit, Cleveland, Milwaukee, Buffalo, and Gary, Indiana. So what's so interesting about these specific places? For me, it's about the people who actually live in those places. And during the early 1900s up through 1970, there was a great migration of Black people from the South to the North. And there was a particular concentration of Black folks in the Midwestern cities. So the Detroits, the Clevelands, the Gary, Chicago, Buffalo, on and on. And as we look at these cities and we look at numbers, I just looked at raw data, right? This is just pulled from the American Community Survey from the census. There's not a whole lot interesting or different in terms of educational attainment. Now, if I put the bachelor's degree on here, okay, that would make a huge difference. But for the most part, 80% or more of these cities that are either EV hubs or have excess water treatment capacity have high school graduation rates of greater than 80% plus bachelor's degrees, right? So high school graduation or higher. Most of them have fairly large populations, except for Gary. Gary's kind of small. But what becomes interesting is looking at the percentage of Black and Hispanic people in that demography. And so when you look at this data, what I didn't break out, if I just broken out and said Black or Hispanic and not put them together, it would tell a little bit of a different story. But the key here is that the places that have some of the lower median incomes, the places that are predominantly minority as the majority, also are places that have high unemployment, high poverty, but they have excess water treatment capacity. Why do we make investments in places that can't serve our needs? And so in some of the work I do, I meet with other agencies that are providing technical assistance to communities. And no shade to anyone if they work for another manufacturer like Ford Motor Company, someone like that. But there was a conversation about some of the communities in Western Tennessee that Ford is locating some of their electric vehicle manufacturing facilities in, but the support facilities, right, to produce the batteries and chips, et cetera, for these EVs are being placed in different little communities on the outskirts. Do those communities have lots of treated water? No. But land is cheap. We can throw something up and we believe we can make a profit. So this is where we're going to put something. Instead of doing the hard, intense work of locating and siting facilities in places where there's built infrastructure and where there are resources because there are people who also need jobs. Places that you invested in, but you also disinvested in when suburbia became popular. And if we want to talk about why suburbia became popular, pick up The Color of Law and look at the GI Bill and the things that were done to incentivize people buying homes in suburbia. So we can always talk about racism isn't structural or institutional, but if you take some time to dig into the policies of the country of the United States and you look at laws that were made and things that were designed, you will see that the world we live in today is actually by design. So as I was leaving, or before I left the city of Detroit, I get called a lot from headhunters to come run utilities. And one of the calls was for Columbus, Ohio. So I'm talking, with them, and they started telling me about how they're building a fourth water treatment plant because Intel is coming. And this is how I got really into understanding electric vehicles, electrification, the need for water, and where we should site things. And they initially, Intel told them they would need 5 million gallons of water per day. So I literally started laughing. And I'm like, Palencia, you cannot laugh. These people are interviewing you. This is not funny. But it's funny to me, not in ha-ha, but ha-ha ironic, because Southeast Michigan has the capability. Now, this is like if everything works and everything was great at its top rated capacity to treat 1.8 billion gallons of fresh water a day. It sells somewhere between 300 and 400 million gallons a day. So you want to talk about excess treatment capacity? We got it all here in Southeast Michigan. So this is ironic to me that you got to build a plant for a little measly. At the time, it was 5 million. Now they only need 1.5 million. Do you know how many Intel facilities we could locate in Southeast Michigan? Do you know how many battery manufacturers? Do you know how many of these places could be here and could provide opportunity? So this particular facility is being constructed. There's a lot of different conversation in Columbus about various people's treatment sources, whether or not this is going to dry up groundwater wells, et cetera, et cetera. It's a $20 billion investment. It is the largest investment in Ohio by the private sector ever. And Intel is going to restore 90 acres of retired farmland to wetlands, which is kind of good because we get blamed up here, particularly when Toledo has algal blooms, but it really is coming from the runoff from the farms. And so I say all of this to say, we have to start looking in places that we don't always look. Nobody looked for me to find me to tell me to be an engineer. I just decided I was going to be one. I am a Detroiter, born and raised. Didn't want to leave, which is why I'm not in Columbus. It's why I'm not in Philadelphia. It's why I'm not in Chicago. It's why I'm not in Houston. All of these places have talked to me, have called, have asked me to come run them. But what is important to me is here, the place that made me, the place that created me. And I feel I owe it to the people who still remain to create opportunities for them. And part of being able to create those opportunities is looking and figuring out how we use water to leverage economic development. It is a very real thing. It is something that I feel like this region in particular and the Great Lakes at large has not utilized in the way it should. I mean, we have a Great Lakes Compact. We already know we're not going to sell it and pipe it out and give it to anybody else. We also know that the Midwest in particular, more specifically Detroit, has been named as one of the best places to live to balance the effects of climate change, right? We're going to have a lot of climate refugees. They're going to be people who can afford to move, right? These are going to be the people that can have a house in Detroit, a house in Miami, a house here, a house there. But we also have to create opportunities for people who live in this region, who live in the Midwest, who have stayed, who don't have the ability to go somewhere else. When I think about Hurricane Katrina in particular, that is always something that will bother me. I was in my young 20s. I know I still look a little young, but was in my young 20s then. And the hardest thing about that for me was seeing people who looked like me who couldn't go somewhere. They didn't have a place to move. They didn't stay in New Orleans because they thought the hurricane wasn't coming. They stayed in New Orleans because they didn't have the capability to leave, right? They couldn't mobilize. And similarly, I always say Detroit prior to bankruptcy was the same as New Orleans, right? Bankruptcy for us was Katrina. It wiped the slate clean in a lot of different areas, but what it didn't do still is provide access and opportunity to those who need it most. So I'll leave with this. I got 3 more slides. This video may or may not play. When we think about electrification, sometimes we don't, and we think about all our little technical goods, and I'm guilty of a lot of things. If I could drive an Escalade, I would. I'll be honest. I like a nice car, I like a sharp car. And that electric Escalade looks very nice. But how many of you know what the conflict in the Democratic of the Congo is about? I see very few hands, right? We have genocide taking place across this world. And much of it is to fuel our capitalistic behaviors, right? Our desire for more, the need for more money, the need for more stuff. The conflict in the Congo, and I'll play a video after this, is about $24 trillion in untapped mineral resources because it is rich in gold and tungsten. And what do you think has to go into all these different electronic devices that we need? Those raw minerals. So I don't know if this is gonna work. Oh, perfect. See, I didn't even have to do it.
UN officials say that they're gravely concerned about the worsening humanitarian crisis in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. Government troops are battling armed groups, including M23 fighters in the mineral-rich areas in the east of the country. M23 has taken control of several towns, and the provincial capital, Goma, is under threat. Decades of conflict have displaced more than 7 million people. Gabriel Elizondo has more from UN headquarters in New York.
In recent weeks, the M23 has made significant advances, expanding territorial control in fighting against the Congolese military. Bintou Keita, the Secretary General's special representative for the country, said the security situation is deteriorating rapidly and the humanitarian situation is reaching near catastrophic levels.
More than 7.1 million people have been displaced in the country. That is 800,000 more people since my last briefing. That was about 3 months ago. 23.4 million people now suffer from food insecurity, which means 1 out of 4 Congolese is suffering from malnutrition.
DRC's ambassador to the UN called on the Security Council to take a stronger stand against Rwanda, widely believed to be supporting the M23.
As a judge will do when faced with a known repeat offender, the Security Council has to cross the Rubicon of impunity to impose on Rwanda the sanctions that are commensurate with its repeated criminal offenses.
But the Rwandan ambassador said it's Burundi and the DRC that are at the root of regional tensions.
According to the group of experts on the DRC, both countries are fighting alongside the FDLR genocidal militia against M23 in an attempt to end a political problem through military means. Rwanda takes these threats very seriously. This is why we appeal for the current security issues to be resolved politically among the Congolese.
All this upheaval comes at a delicate moment as the UN-led peacekeeping force known as MONUSCO is pulling out of the country at the request of the Congolese government. The UN said the first phase of the withdrawal should be complete by the end of April, and all the peacekeepers will be out by the end of the year. Gabriel Elizondo, Al Jazeera at the United Nations in New York.
So In a nutshell, millions of people have been displaced. 24 million people in the Congo are suffering from food insecurity. Thousands have been killed. And this is ongoing, right? There are times where it kind of slowed down and then it escalated. And it escalated greatly in the last 10 to 20 years because of all our little technology. And so, as much as we love advances in tech, we need to think about the full life cycle of everything. There's a human aspect to why we do what we do, right? When I think about civil engineering, I was having a conversation with somebody probably yesterday. I talked so much, I don't remember when I was having this conversation. But civil engineering is about civility, humankind, mankind. And everything that we do is about making the world better for the humans that occupy this space with us, that we occupy space with. And so to bring it all together, because you're like, where is she going with this? We have to learn how to effectively leverage resources. We have to be kinder in what we're doing. What's happening in the Congo shouldn't even happen. It's happening because people don't have, and lack of access creates infighting. It creates this need to have dominance and somebody on top. And it creates an opportunity for people to sacrifice each other in the pursuit of wealth. And so, to sum it all together, one, in the Great Lakes Basin, in our Midwestern cities, we have excess water treatment capacity. We have now Detroit gets ripped for transportation infrastructure because of public transit, but we do have great transportation infrastructure, large airports, great ports for shipping, right? The Great Lakes, St. Lawrence Seaway is one of the busiest, seaways in the world. We have the Ambassador Bridge, right? Busiest border crossing in the US, but we have rail. We have a lot of rail, and I know because when I was implementing the drainage charge at the water department, all of the rail companies came to see me to tell me how the rail lines didn't absorb any water, and they weren't generating runoff. We have great energy infrastructure. Some of it needs work. As many of us know, I was going to get an electric vehicle last year when I turned in my lease. And when I started thinking about places that I needed to drive in the Midwest, there weren't necessarily a lot of places where I could go charge up where it would be efficient for me to not have a gas guzzler. So I'll still have a gas guzzler. We are now locating technology and innovation hubs throughout the Midwest, and very thankful, particularly in Detroit, for those who have made an investment in tech, who are looking at folks who typically don't get someone to look at them in their technologies. Urban revitalization and quality of life. These are actually places people want to live now. Go figure. And the environment and resilience. So from working in government, I can tell you that a lot of effort is going on across the board, not just in the Midwest, but in cities at large, thinking about how we make them more sustainable, more resilient to climate change, whether you think it's the natural evolution of how the earth was going to change, or you think it is man-made or some combination thereof. But all of these things come into play when you are trying to pick a place to site your EV manufacturing and the necessary accessories that go into that. And so I say that to say, in the worlds that you work in, some of this may not be of interest to you, some of it may be of interest to you. But what I know for sure is that we have people, we have land, and we have the ability to do so. Detroit put the world on wheels. The Midwest is the manufacturing, was the manufacturing hub of the United States. And when it's all said and done, we can once again reclaim our spaces there, but also create vibrant, healthy, thriving communities in which we all coexist, and we're leveraging all of the resources for the betterment and the upliftment of the entire community. Thank you.